Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to Tanim Graun, Papua New Guinea's Q&A series to encourage public dialogue, debate, and engagement on the development challenges and opportunities facing our country and how we as citizens can help shape our nation's future. Today's subject is ending discrimination, HIV prevention, treatment, and care services in Papua New Guinea. My name is Alan Bird. We are proud to host this National AIDS Council Secretariat and PNG Business Coalition Against HIV and AIDS Business Leaders Forum. Now in its third decade, the global HIV and AIDS epidemic continues to pose a major threat to sustainable development despite significant progress in the overall response over the last decade. The loss of human capital due to AIDS continues to take a global toll, both at home and at the national economic levels. While significant progress has been made, challenges still remain. Despite this, many vulnerable communities face considerable hurdles to accessing prevention, treatment, and care services. Stigma, discrimination, and violence are some of the key barriers to accessing these services. As a nation, where do we sit on the global stage in addressing this issue? Before we start, may I make a special welcome to some of our guests who are here from Vanuatu and Solomon Islands. These young people are here for the Melanesian debate. Thank you for joining us. With me to discuss this subject today is Mr. Peter Beera, who is the Director of the National AIDS Council. Carolyn Bunamiga from General Business Coalition Against HIV and AIDS, BAHA for short. Dame Carol Kidu, welcome back. Dame is a task force member for the ICPD, and what was the other thing? The one we really liked? The Global Commission on HIV and the Law. We also have Dr. Paisan Dakulala, who is the Deputy Secretary for the National Department of Health. Welcome, Doctor. Mr. Kevin Miles, Manager of Health Program for Oil Search Limited. Thank you for joining us. Lydia Seta, the Program Manager at Save the Children. Mr. Ian Brady, who is the Interim Executive Director for the PNG DLA. Mr. Ian Ako, who is Key Population Representative. And of course, the ever popular Mr. Martin Namarong of the Namarong Report. Now, the focus of this year's World AIDS Day has been on ending discrimination and improving access to basic services for key populations. What are some of the specific things being done to end stigma and discrimination against people living with HIV and those who are most at risk? Are we doing enough? What more should we be doing?
The PNG Development Law Association is an example of real work that's being done to change stigma and discrimination relating to HIV in Papua New Guinea. It's been funded by Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade under the Australian aid budget, and it's a service that provides free legal advice and services representation to people with HIV and people most at risk of HIV. People knowing their rights and having access to legal services means that they'll have access to justice and they'll be able to change the circumstances that lead to stigma and discrimination. So that's an active thing that's being done.
Just quickly, going around, what is the level of discrimination out there? I mean, we are talking about that. Is it very prevalent?
I think for our audience and the viewers, I think stigma and discrimination in general, it's a very important. It's got a big devastating factor on the prevention, treatment, and care for services for people in PNG, as it's in global in terms of access to services, and that's the biggest barrier. Just like we'll talk about that violence, but for the response globally, and that's the issue we are struggling with it, and we are not really addressing it. And hopefully with this one, we are going to look at different ways we are addressing it, which is like coming out like this and really talk about stigma and discrimination, because that's the biggest barrier, despite our efforts and other things we are with the response, but that's the biggest issue.
What specific forms of discrimination are we talking about?
One of the discrimination major areas we recognized early in our lives was disclosure. after disclosure, if somebody was perhaps coerced or asked without them understanding the impact about their status. But we know now that there is a law that protects people living with the virus, and perhaps those affected also by the virus. And so nobody is coerced or is forced to provide their medical information. So that's one thing that protects employees in the workplace.
What you're saying is, if someone has HIV, they are under no pressure to make that public knowledge.
Disclosure.
I remember as a clinician several years ago, in the early part of the epidemic, asking my staff about whether we should declare the ward HIV/AIDS ward. And it was a shocker for them, because this was really difficult for them to, for us to put in that kind of label. And they said that, people are just not ready. 10 years down the line, I went to another setting where I thought this group of the province people are more aware, so we could, go on and write in HIV/AIDS ward as an example. And they were not ready.
Okay, but coming back a bit, now, my understanding is that if, for instance, I had HIV, and if I was to say, touch Dame, she won't get infected, right?
No, she won't, and that's...
So why do we have this stigmatization? If it is safe to sit next to and eat with and hold hands, even hug people with HIV and AIDS, why do we have this stigmatization?
With all diseases and infections, if you look at Ebola going on in different parts of the world now, and there's quite a lot of fear, and when there's something that people don't know and they don't understand, their immediate reaction is to back off from it and be fearful of it. But having said that, you need to be able to tease out what's real stigma and discrimination versus what's perceived. And often we sort of get trapped in, there's lots of stigma and discrimination. In fact, there's actually lots of headway that Papua New Guinea's made in terms of, there's a lot of people who are out there who can go home and talk to their partners as how it's managed. And certainly our teams out in the field and our clinical doctors and nurses put a lot of effort into when one partner tests HIV positive, bringing in the husband or the wife and going through a process with them of helping them understand, and then they accept it. And when you have something that gets out of hand and not managed correctly, yes, it can result in violence, domestic violence, happens in the household, but it can be managed, certainly. And we've, doctors and nurses, if we look way back, in every country has gone through the same. And I remember 25 years ago when I started working in the field of HIV, that staff were very fearful. Nobody wanted to work on the HIV ward. And here in Papua New Guinea we have a lot of really caring, compassionate doctors and nurses who do a really good job at looking after people living with HIV.
Oh, that's wonderful. Anyone else want to jump in, Martin?
When I was in med school, the first patient I ever inserted an IV cannula, the drip in, was a HIV positive person. Now, I addressed that in a matter of fact kind of thing. It was just a medical procedure. But in thinking about that, in terms of how I reacted to how other people react, I think it's a general thing that's not just HIV. It's about self-preservation. People just, if they're scared of a masala, they're afraid of it. If HIV is associated with, the fact that there is no cure for it, people obviously very scared of it. And also the fact that, we're a culture that's very visual. So if I can't see the virus, I don't know what it is. I don't know how, and despite what someone else might tell me about transmission mechanisms, if I can't see how that thing works, I might be much more cautious.
For those of you involved with the work, say if you went back 10 years, and the amount of progress in terms of how much we're doing to get that awareness out, and has there been an improvement in, say, a reduction in the level of discrimination?
Just imagine when we first started off in the HIV/AIDS campaign, even the word quap and condom was very, very difficult. But that's changed. Today you say that in the awareness and even talking on the preventative measure of condoms, and that's just like it's more readily accepted at this point in time. And I think as we have increased in knowledge, today we have close to about 500 counseling sites, testing and counseling sites in the country, as opposed to when we had only just 3 or 4.
Let's go to an audience question now. We have George from Vanuatu.
There have been suggestions that PNG's epidemic is concentrated in certain geographical locations and key population. What exactly does that mean? Who is most at risk and why? And what does that mean in terms of how we respond to HIV in PNG?
Panel members?
I'm from the private sector NGO, so what we understand by the question you're asking is that which are the people most at risk or most likely to perhaps get infection through a casual contact or contact without protection. And so this is what we have to work on, is like look at our workforce. So we look at, say, seamen. A seaman goes away for 3 months, especially a single one. He arrives back on port and he's got loads of money on him in his bank, and he's got nothing much to spend on money but beer and booze, as we understand, down at the wharf. And so we need to be able to know that this person has had access to information and some training through his company that will make him think twice. I'm coming off the boat, I have lots of money. And this is a fact of life. A lot of our night business takes place at the wharf when the ships come in. So this fellow now has a choice to say, when I get out there, I'll be careful. I should be able to remember what I was taught in a program run by BAHA, which is a business houses program here in Papua New Guinea. So I should have a condom on my hand or in my pocket. I should maybe think twice about how I spend my money. Too much booze, I'm out of control. Then I'm out of control in other things that I do after I get drunk.
So we're talking prevention here.
Exactly.
If we look at the evidence, George, that we have here in PNG, and that's one thing that we have some gaps in the evidence. And there's been a lot of work recently with our partners at the Department of Health, WHO, UNAIDS, looking at, okay, which are the populations? It's a big question that everybody asks. Who's most at risk? Am I at risk? Are you at risk? And we know that across the country is about 0.65% of the population is possibly infected with HIV at the moment. But there's some groups of the population who have much higher levels of HIV, are more likely to test HIV positive. Some of that's in geographical areas of the country. A lot of it comes down to sexual behaviours. People are having multiple partners when they're not using condoms. And then there are some other key populations, such as men who have sex with men, sex workers, transgender populations, where we have seen higher levels of HIV. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're driving the epidemic. We actually don't really understand the numbers of those populations in the country. So it's quite a mixed epidemic, really. If you go up into the highlands, it's the husband and his 2 or 3 wives and one of their children who might be HIV positive. Whereas down here in Moresby, it might look different. And you go over to Lane, it looks different again. So we tend to move between talking about a generalised epidemic versus a concentrated epidemic. And I probably sit in the middle and think there's a little bit of a mixture going on.
Part of the analysis of the data and the risk factors that you were just talking about then leads on to questions about, well, how can we respond to HIV? And what we do know from the data we have and from looking at the information internationally is that some of those risk factors, some of the groups that exhibit those risk factors are people involved in sex work, men who have sex with men. And we can look at the circumstances, and particularly coming from a legal perspective, we can look at the human rights circumstances that lead to higher risk. And we can then look at changing those circumstances, creating risk around HIV. So, for instance, in relation to men who have sex with men, in Papua New Guinea, same-sex sexual relations between men, homosexual sex between men is criminalised. Sex work is criminalised. The laws that criminalise these things are laws that harken back to the days before they were actually blowovers from pre-independence. They were adopted in Schedule 1 of the Constitution, and they're meant to be reviewed, and they just haven't been reviewed. So they're very old laws. They relate to England, not to Papua New Guinea. And we know from the international data and from the work that Dame Kiddu has done on the Commission on HIV and the Law, that the legal environment can actually fuel the risk factors.
So really, anyone who is having multiple sexual partners and having unprotected sex is at risk.
That's right.
Regardless of whether you're in one particular group or another.
That's right.
I think, as Brady was saying, it's also the environment that you're living and working in, and if you're living in an environment where you're not able to access health services because you might be a gay man, because you're fearful of being discriminated against, that might be the risk factor that you actually face, not because you're choosing to have unprotected sex, because it might be because you can't access condoms, you can't access a service because the service turns you away.
From Dr. Lakalala on the issue of heterosexual sex, and that is a major reason for transmission. And the big difference is too that a person in a heterosexual relationship is more able to go and get services. In a homosexual relationship, adult behaviour in private, it is very hard for them when those behaviours are criminalised. In some of our countries in the Pacific, those behaviours are not criminalised because those countries did not inherit the British criminal code. But for those people where it is criminalised, it's very hard for them to go and access services because there is that criminality that puts a stigma to it.
We now go to our talk out segment.
Like doing sex work, they've got their own reason, different reasons of doing it. And they're not born with that. It's not their profession or what. But they have their own reason of doing it. And we don't know that reason. It can be abused by their own family or so many reasons of doing it. Or maybe they are thinking that we are not like any other woman, like married and steady ones. So maybe they look down at us, and then we face the stigma and discrimination. Their perspective is they are thinking that we are abnormal people in the community because of the culture and customs. They don't respect, women who live there or up in the islands. It's really hard. When a woman is alone, then they don't respect him. But when they are with their husband, like when the parents or relatives get bride price, then they are happy with that woman. But otherwise, when you are alone, they don't respect you. Men bashing, like violence and bashing.
Miblo Eastern Highlands. Na lili kamo semi bono seman amistad, but the feeling and negative different. Kaino semi osem MSM mi la kolo house time sick na migo iket all officers we sta la house all sawe lo Me Misa excessive service was a friendly na dislakain na all sawo se mi dislakain sometimes time ono sa helping me lo excessive service lo time is sick or dislakain ono sa utoko dislakain na sa rause mi so mi mas go lo one have me feel comfortable na service alright lo mi misa kona excessive time se mi pla go lo work all sampla sa Mipa like all work na skill work na islakain no so mipa dislakain no ono sa mipa lo work because lo disla status lo mipa ose mipa K o MSM on islakain so ono sa si mipa lo work but usat we all sawe na awareness through awareness na advocate na islakain no so we got to islakain lo community all staff all aware lo gen line also employment plan and plus work.
My daughters, I have a dream for them, so that they can go and do something better in the future, but not like doing sex work. No, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm working, earning money, and sending them to schools, so they can be better in the future.
Just because difference me man na me surround with the man can this like kind tassel broken but now some plenty all understand or some or got this like kind so I think some we message in reach more them all can understand me plus one kind of them all.
And thank you to all those people who took part in that talk out. We now go to a question from Denmark, from the Solomon Islands.
Gender and sexual-based violence is still a huge problem in Papua New Guinea. Does that make our women and girls more vulnerable to HIV infection? What should PNG be doing to protect women and girls from the HIV and AIDS?
What's the reaction from the panel?
Violence and gender-based violence is one of the drivers of the epidemic because violent sexual behaviours make one more vulnerable. And so some of the medical people could speak more on that issue perhaps. But definitely, particularly for women and girls, our anatomy is quite different from the male and it makes us extremely vulnerable if there is violent sexual behaviours. Yeah,
he was particularly touching with the woman there, talking about how she's actually earning money from
for her daughter.
From sex, just to
like
put her daughters through school.
Yeah, I've known personally women who are doing that because they just. Yeah.
You ask about the young fellow asked about what are we doing about it. This country, I'm happy to see, particularly in the past week, there has been a lot of programs on violence, not just violence, gender-based violence, violence in the home, violence against children, just violence. It's a huge problem in our country, and we are trying. For us in the business sector, we have a lot of program and emphasis in our training of our trainers out there, HIV trainers particularly, to focus on how to alleviate that problem. One of the way we find out is bring the perpetrators to court, at least to at least penalty. In my experience of 10 years, we've been able to do it once, and that is quite hard. But what we find out is the more the women know that they have rights, the more they're willing to come out and talk, particularly if they know that there's not going to be any, what we call in Papua New Guinea, payback. Okay, so if there's going to be less retribution or the woman is not going to be targeted for speaking up, and she knows that that exists, and I'm happy to say again, within our public sector, our private, and also our NGO, which is very important, we have that.
But Carolyn, I just want to come in here. Now, we're saying it's the woman. What about the community? I mean, we're talking about the woman or the girl who is a victim of this violence, and obviously she has to live in a community. What are community attitudes towards this? If a woman or girl is being bashed somewhere, say in your neighbor's house, what do you do?
But I think there is a big change. Tuesday morning, I was at the white ribbon breakfast, and I've been attending such things for 15 years in politics. Now, the big difference is that when we were first having walks in Port Moresby, having marches and petitions, having breakfasts and things, the audience and the people there were all women. Last Tuesday, I would say it was half and half. Men are standing up and speaking now, and I think that's a huge change that we're seeing. The men are standing up and speaking now, so we hope that this is starting the momentum to really take that community response that you're talking about.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's no longer just a women's issue.
Could I also just put a gloss on what was being suggested? I agree. Our centre does a lot of work, a lot of casework involving interim protection orders for people who've been subject to domestic violence or gender-based violence, whether they're male or female. And it is good that we have provisions to be able to generate punishments for these people. However, what's been discovered in other countries that have started to try and take more sophisticated steps. The law is not a particularly sophisticated tool, particularly the criminal law and the courts. They're very sophisticated in the way they operate, but their ability to change behaviours is not very sophisticated. And the history shows, the evidence shows that criminalising behaviours and placing punishments through the court on people may have a small effect. It can have profound effects on some people, but in general, it tends not to have much of an effect. And so while I'm not discounting at all the importance of having those sanctions as the state, the community, the population saying this must stop and this is not acceptable, we also need to be thinking in more sophisticated ways about engaging the perpetrators and the victims in meaningful analysis, discussion, learning, education about the syndrome of violence that they are engaged in. And don't get me wrong, by saying the victim is included in that, I'm not attempting to blame the victim for, or suggesting that the victim is in any way to blame for the behaviours, but there are two people involved in those violent interactions, and both of those people need to somehow change the way they're behaving with each other. Maybe sometimes they have to not be with each other. But the law alone isn't going to have a solution for us. And I understand that the law and justice sector are working on some diversion programs to try and engage particularly men who are engaged in domestic violence and really change the conversation with men about the acceptability of violence in this society. And that's where we'll start to get the change, I think, rather than just criminalising and penalties, although they're important.
Well, are we doing enough as a society, as civil society, as government, as business, as community? Are we doing enough? We're not doing enough.
I don't think so.
I think
as a whole,
there are some organizations who try to work around gender-based violence and address those issues, but when it comes to it's another thing, it's very difficult for people who are facing gender-based violence to open up as well. Even if in a clinical setting, if you try to go through all the questions and you ask about gender-based violence, it will take some time for them to come out and tell you that they are going through this. Because knowing that, like for example, a sex worker coming in and talking about gender-based violence, that person is already stigmatized, discriminated in so many ways. And then on top of that, they're going through this gender-based violence. And who is there to actually help them out? Where is the justice? So those are some of the things that they face, which are hidden and kept in themselves. And yes, there are some people who try to help them, but not many other organizations, and they need support.
Well, you're watching Tanim Graun. We now go to an audience question. George Raubi, if you're there.
One of the reasons why sex workers and men who have sex with men and transgender people are vulnerable to HIV is because PNG law criminalizes prostitution and same-sex relationship. Number one, should the Summary Offence Act and the criminal law be amended to make prostitution and same-sex legal in Papua New Guinea. In the meantime, how do we, as service providers, provide service to this group of people without breaking the law?
Thanks, George, for a really good question. I'd actually like to say that I don't see that we should amend the law to make them legal. We should amend the law by repealing these archaic laws, get rid of them. They're 1800s laws from the British Criminal Code. They were inherited to Papua New Guinea through the Queensland Criminal Code up to Papua New Guinea. And I said before, our French territories and nations of the Pacific region inherited different laws, and these behaviours are not criminalised in those laws. We've inherited ones they are. Now, I don't actually say we should make them legal, we should just take it out of the criminal code, because I don't think it's the matter of criminal law whether how adults behave in private in terms of their sexual behaviour. And so probably the legal people will want to say more, but I wouldn't even agree with legalising. Just take them out of the criminal code. They shouldn't be part of the criminal code. Be like the French, make it a separate issue. Just remove them completely. Because if we legalise, we could have abuse in another way. We could have even men or women setting up brothels and making money out of people and using people in that way. Just make it a non-criminal issue is what I would support.
Good point. Anyone else?
The question on how do we help these people, I think for me, we should help these people. The law is there, but it's because of the law, the criminal law. These people, we call them hard to reach. So because of the behavior and stigma and things like that, they go and they find it hard to come out to access services, things like that. So we should help them. So that's why we're trying to help them by looking for them and making services available for them. And it's a human rights thing. They need those the services. So we can't say that's the law, but the law is look like a barrier because we want to help them, but they go out hiding because of the law. They're going to get prosecuted. So we can't leave them, but we need to help them because they're the risk group and it's under human rights. So
going back to the talk out, listening to the mother who is a sex worker, and she did say that, look, I'm doing this because I have no other means of earning an income. I'm being stigmatized because I don't have a husband. So I do this so that I can put my girls through school and I can break the cycle with my girls because I don't want them doing what I'm doing. So if we're going to criminalize it, that sort of brave effort by a mother who is already vulnerable, trying to get two young girls also to break out of a cycle, and they are also vulnerable.
I think that and perhaps Peter Bure can back me up on this, NAC's held some regional forums around the country this year, and while there was an expectation that there would still be a backlash against, renovating or reforming the laws regarding homosexuality and sex work, what we found in those regional forums was that there was actually a mood for change. And what we find among the politicians now, we've had Michael Malabag, the Minister for Health, come out supporting reform of the law in relation to homosexuality and to sex work. We've had our governor here in the NCD, Paz Pakov, come out. We've had some other prominent politicians come out in favour of reforming the law. I think there's another pathway because reforming the law may well create some conflict and friction. There is another pathway, and PNG DLA constructing some test cases to test the current criminal code against the Constitution, against the rights enshrined in the Constitution. This is a pathway that was always meant to happen.
This is the pathway that was taken in India when they could not get the political will to change the laws, and that's understandable. Politicians respond to the feelings of what people might be saying. There wasn't the political will, and when I tried to amend the laws, there was no political will to do it. In India, they took the pathway of a High Court reference on striking out these British laws, and it was a successful reference to strike out the laws, the similar laws that we have inherited.
I have a nursing background, and I came into this profession to care for people, but there is no sort of legislation that can prevent a healthcare worker looking after a gay man or a transgender person, and but that's my approach to it. Sort of, and staff often come to me. Some of our healthcare workers come to me. I don't understand this. This MSM. This men who have sex with men. And I said, I don't understand people who drink coffee. It's the most bitter tasting thing for me, but it doesn't mean I wouldn't, pour coffee for somebody else. And you don't have to understand everything about the world, but you need to acknowledge it and show compassion and look after, like Dr. Dakalala was saying, draw compassion and loving thy neighbour.
And I think some of the vulnerable communities could give several stories about how the laws, although they're not actually being implemented perhaps, but they are abused, where people are blackmailed and money taken from them because they know that, they can be charged. And so, why? Laws that are not used but can be abused, to me, under our wonderful mama law, the Constitution of Papua New Guinea, that is enshrined in human rights, I find it difficult to accept laws that are not used perhaps, not implemented, but they can still be abused.
You're watching Tanim Graun, and I want to move us on to another talk out now, if you'll bear with me.
Hello, my name is Ian Ako. I'm a gay person, a transgender in PNG. I am here to tell you my story. We have different groups. We have gay men group, we have transgender group, and also we have transgender gay men who are living with HIV positive network as well. So we want to be called by our partners, especially the non-government organization who works with our organization, to be called the key affected population, because we see that we haven't got any access to the basic services that we know it is our right as a human being to access, that people see that we are vulnerable to access those services. The community and the society that we live in sees us as an outcast, where they don't like to involve us in participating through or socializing with our communities. Also, basically, when you talk about accessing of services, health is the main issue that many of us find it very hard to access health services. We've seen that we've been neglected from our rights of accessing those services. Education is not our priority, because every time when we go to school, we are the focus of being bullied. We don't participate socially within school grounds, and also that's one of the main things that many of us dropped out from school, even to colleges. We don't get as far as our dream can take us to. If, for instance, if I want to be a doctor, it won't take me that far because of the stigma that I'm seeing towards me as being different within this group of people than this group of people.
Hi, my name is Andrew. I'm from Tufi. I was born and raised here up in Eastern Highlands, and I'm a transgender that is living here and has always been here up in Goroka especially. My biological father has not spoken to me in years, and it's a no-no. So for family, they know I'm family, but then it took time for them to get used to me, and once I got a job, I just had to fit in and take my place in the family and just did the normal things. So it took time for them, but it wasn't easy for my family. And having a gay son in the society, no. Not a day goes by that I don't get discriminated. I'd rather walk out clearly and stand out and just be myself, because I'm past this part where of feeling sorry for myself. sort of thing is. So I'd rather come out clear and stop discrimination, and for in the near future we should have more sensitization with regards to the marginalized community that we have. Every day everyone has something to say about me. At work, at home, it starts off in the house. It may not be me or not my family, or it may be my neighbors. And yeah, it's just name calling, number one. And name calling, with regards to name calling, I'll explain that it's mainly to do with my sexual preference and not me as a person. Some openly they go gay, or some, the very offensive thing is people just go gay, or some just go that poofta over there, and they start laughing. That's the thing that really hits me, but then that's almost every day. The support mainly is I'd like the government to put in sex education, meaning like start off with something with sex education, where they teach our children that there are different types of people with different sexual preferences, and they should learn to respect those people with their values and see them as people that with potential, and not people with a disability with their sexual preferences, whichever sexual preference they choose to have, you see. It's mainly because of a male-dominated society, our culture that backs that up, and yeah, it's just that. And it's like in our society, when you're a man, you're a man, and our status in the society doesn't allow these sort of things to happen. Please take me as a person, and not my sexuality or my sexual preferences, or whatever I choose to, whatever sexual act I choose to practice. That should not be put out in public. I should be able to do something better, meaning I have education, I can get a job, I pay tax to the government. I want to be free, and if everyone could just see me as a person, as Andrew, and not Andrew that gay.
Let's give our friend a hand. And I want to commend your bravery, knowing what our country is like, for you to come out like that. And certainly from this show, we hope you are given a better deal, because you are citizens and you're very productive citizens. There are many of our communities out there who actually accept this as quite normal. And I know certainly, it's part of our culture. And those that...
There's actually some languages, a couple of areas in Papua New Guinea, languages that do have three words: for male, female, and transgendered. And of course, our Samoan friends, they acknowledge sexual diversity. And their Prime Minister, their former Prime Minister, became the patron of the Whawhawhine Association of Samoa, and that made a huge impact. When the Deputy Prime Minister and I launched the Sexual Diversity Network for the Pacific region in Bali, and some of our transgendered population were there, I really felt a sadness, and I said that in my short speech. I felt a sadness that our transgendered community could be themselves there in Bali with the other Pacific transgendered community, but I knew that when they got home here to Papua New Guinea, they would not be able to be who they were, because they would feel this blanket over them, looking at them,
We have faced a lot of discrimination and stigma growing up at the stage where we are now. We've seen that the law looked at us as criminals and outcasts. We don't get basic information of the necessary or vital services that we know that we are fellow human beings, fellow citizens of this country, that it's our right to access those services, that people see us as minority, and people see us that, disadvantaged people. They don't want to socialize with us. So a majority of us have been victims to so many abuses, as I've mentioned earlier, especially accessing of health services. We find it very, very hard for us to access service in terms of our identity. We feel that now we've been championed with the formation of our organization, who advocates strongly for our rights to be heard, and also rolling out our programs to business partners on sensitization program, sensitizing the workers, the health workers on our issue, how they can react to us and how they can take upon us as fellow human beings or fellow Papua New Guineans.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done to change the behavior even of health workers. So we do have languages like, for instance, heduru, the word heduru. That's an attempt to make it as friendly as we can in terms of the HIV or STI. And we have hagu. Hagu in Milne Bay stands for friend. And then Anua Moriri in Engau. Anua is house, and Moriri, I think it's to do with friend. And so that's the attempt by the department.
But even with all of that, and you so rightly stated, there is a government policy.
Yes.
What would the health department do if someone, say, like Ian, was to require assistance from our government health workers and they get turned away because of the way they choose to live? What do we do about that? Is there, have we had incidences like that, and what do we do about it?
Well, this should be reported to the management of the hospital or the setting where it's happening. You yourself are the board manager of your hospital, and the decision need to be made by the board not to tolerate this.
As well as some test cases that we are constructing currently to change those laws. One of the programs or projects that PNG-DLA is involved in and is hoping to be partnering with some of the other organisations is to start a conversation in Papua New Guinea about creating laws to stop discrimination and to have a remedy for people who are subject of discrimination. The Constitution provides the right of equality for all citizens. However, there are no, apart from one law called the Discriminatory Practices Act from 1963 that only seems to deal with race, tribe, nation, etc., there are no laws to protect women, gay men, disabled people, other people who would be vulnerable or be discriminated against. There are no laws to protect them or give them a remedy. And while policies are excellent for government departments and businesses to have, if there's an actual remedy in civil law where teeth are given to those policies, so that if people are discriminated against, they can go to court, prove their case, and actually get compensation, that is what forces businesses and government to change its behaviours, to change the game in relation to providing services. It also, just by having the law, makes a clear statement from the people of Papua New Guinea that we want this to change. So that discussion will be starting next year, and already I know that there's a lot of interest from a lot of the advocacy organisations, and I'm hoping that there should be interest from a lot of the women's organisations, because women are, I think, in this country routinely discriminated against. And yet there are no protections. There's nothing to deliver those constitutional rights to the ground. And maybe we need to find the Melanesian way and find Papua New Guinea's way to bringing equality.
It is actually the churches who are doing an enormous amount of work in HIV and working with sex workers and working with transgendered and people of different sexualities. In some of the health work response, it shows that, there can be compassion. It doesn't have to be a conflict between Christianity and these legal issues. There are many very strong Christians who are administering health services and compassionately to people from these stigmatized groups. So surely that is a statement in itself, that they perhaps don't even agree with the laws themselves, some of them.
Well, absolutely.
Yes.
In my province, it's the Catholic Church that cares for those with HIV and AIDS. So there you go. Mm. We go to an audience question to the panel. Jessica Parapolo from the Solomon Islands.
I understand that there's an increasing number of young girls who are being drawn into sex work in major cities around the country. What are you seeing from Save the Children's HIV work with sex workers? What should we as a country do to stop this from happening, and how can the private sector help?
Thank you, Jessica.
The work that we do with our targeted population, yes, as you've mentioned, there are a lot of young girls who are driven into sex work. But looking at those ones, we also try to find out that there are a lot of factors that drives them to do sex work. So by saying that, for example, within the clinical settings that we have, we see a lot of young girls coming in, and also with the outreach work down in the communities, there are also a lot of young girls who are into sex work. So I think with the health, we see it as those young girls, they are the future. They can bring our country to the next level in the future. So we try as much to do what we can do within the capacity, limited capacity that we have. For example, we take them through counseling. We also try to actually just provide options for them, like saying that, okay, there are complications that are behind sex work, so you need to understand. And we also try to engage them back to their families, but there have been difficulties because there are sometimes girls come in as babysitters, other people taking them in, as well as there are some other things that they see. As I have mentioned, those different factors, like there are other young girls in schools where they have a lot of things where others cannot have, or some of those things that actually make them to go out there to do sex work. So what I'm thinking, not myself, but as an organization, we've tried referring those girls to other service providers, but as we've noticed that there is not much services available from those other organizations that are providing like basic life skills training, something that they can take on board to sustain themselves. And I think it will be a good opportunity for business houses to create some kind of work, especially for those girls who are in sex work, or probably come up with something that they can basically say, okay, maybe they do not have those required skills that they expect, but they can take them on board to build them from there so that they can have something to sustain themselves as well. So those are some of the gaps that we see that is still within the program that we are running. So, and I know there are some other NGOs, organizations as well. They're trying to help as much as they can, but I think there is a lot of room that we can improve on taking on board those young girls so that they can have a meaningful life in the future.
Why are so many young girls being forced? I like to use the word forced. I don't understand the reasons. What are the reasons why so many young girls are being pushed into sex work?
It's also how young girls value themselves in society. And if a young girl grows up believing that she is a product or a commodity for men to use, and that's something that needs to change. And young girls from a very young age need those role models in society and at school and from their parents, and to say, actually, no, you're an individual, you're a strong person, and you're you know, you have rights, and you don't have to be bought. And so when, you know, we certainly there's an issue with some men who are coming by the schools and picking up young girls, and young girls are jumping into vehicles, and you know it is quick cash. It may be favours, it might be favours for a lift, but it's often cash. But it's actually because they don't value themselves as much, because they haven't had those role models and been taught to. And there's more work to be done, and we've done some work with school teachers and personal development and helping with that sexual reproductive health education, and part of that is enabling young people to be able to say no.
urban poverty can be a driver of sex work. I remember one time when there was there's a big betel nut ban now, but an earlier time when there was a betel nut ban, a pastor came to me from one of the communities and was more or less begging me, saying, please, can you try to tell them to stop, to let the women sell their betel nut? Because he said, if they don't sell their betel nut, remember, daily income is the main thing for some people in urban poverty. They live on a daily income to get their packet of rice for that night. And he found that the women were having to sell sex to the store owner because they hadn't got their money from betel nut sales to get their packet of rice. I mean, that's a real example of the situation. So it can be driven by all sorts of things, the desire for better things, pure poverty, and sometimes even parents. I've known cases where even parents have kind of encouraged it, but kind of pretending, like, saying, oh, she's got a friend, and really it's a sugar daddy. But, when when families are struggling to get their rice. So it definitely ties in with poverty as well as the desire for more things which other people have. Complex.
Yes?
Yeah. So I was going to add on to that. I think the main reason, like Dame Carol mentioned, is poverty and economic reason, but there's also research we know that especially women, girls who become sex workers, a significant proportion of them is due to violence, sexual abuse when they're young, and the ones who are, so they are forced. So that's a significant factor as well. So we have to remember that. So it's sexual violence, and those are orphans and things like that. And it's not really the economic alone, but there's others. If you are a child, a young girl growing up, if you've been sexually assaulted or abused, you are most likely to it's like Kevin said, they've lost their, they have dignity and things like that, so they are forced to do that. So it's a society as well.
We must emphasize that we do have legislation in Papua New Guinea on child sexual exploitation. Child was defined as 18 years of age. So any male or female under 18 years of age who's been used in sex work, it's not the child that should be prosecuted, it is the person, the perpetrator, the partner, or whoever is using that child. We do have child sexual exploitation legislation. We passed that in 2002.
On that note, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Join me in thanking our panel members. Thank you very much, Peter Bire from the National AIDS Council, Carolyn from BAHA, the Business Coalition Against HIV and AIDS, Dame Kidu, Dr. Dakulala from the Department of National Health, Kevin Miles from Oil Search, thank you very much for joining us. Ian Brady, thank you, it was wonderful having you. Lydia from Save the Children. Ian, thank you very much for being part of our show, and I commend you for your courage. And of course, you have a colorful Martin Namarong. Thank you for joining us today on Tanim Graun. Tune in next time. Na Tingim, Tok Tok Blong You by Tanim Graun.